Hey guys, so the second week of our question and answer series had just two questions, but they're really amazing questions. Alright, so the first one is, if God made us in His image, why do we carry sin? Like, if God's perfect and He made us, did He make a mistake? Because, like, we have sin in us, right? Like, did He mess up somewhere? It's a really amazing question. Like, why do we carry sin? So, to check that out, go to the very beginning of your Bible, right? Open it up. It's like page 1 after all, like, the index and everything, right? And it's Genesis. Genesis just means beginnings, right? That's literally what the word means. So it's the beginning of the Bible, and in that you see God creating everything, right? Like stars. That's a terrible star. Anyway, I can't draw. You know that. He creates stars, heavens, the earth, everything. The moon. That's a moon, I guess. Looked like a scary face, or a cookie. Anyway, and then He created all the animals, and He created Adam and Eve. So Adam, he has a cool beard, and Eve, and she has some luscious hair. That's luscious hair, if you didn't know. All right, and He just made everything perfect, right? Like, they lived in this place called the Garden of Eden, and there was no sin, there was no badness, and they didn't have to worry about, like, dying or getting sick or hurt, or like finding food. Like, they could just walk up to a tree and be like, and everything was tasty, and they didn't have to worry about it being rotten or making them sick. Nothing. Everything was perfect. But God gave them one rule, right? There was this tree, or a volcano, as it looked like, maybe. There's a tree in the middle of the garden, and it had fruit on it, and God said, don't eat that fruit on that tree. Like, that is the only rule I have of you, right? And it was called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And what happened next was Satan, who, remember, is an angel that hated God. That's a little snake with a tongue. Anyway, he was an angel who was kicked out of heaven and hated God. And he hated that God made us and loved us and cared for us. So he tricked Eve into saying, hey, you know what? God doesn't want you to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil because He doesn't want you to be as smart as Him, because you'd be a better God than He is. And He doesn't want you to know about that, right? Like, He wants to be in control. He is totally on a power trip. And you should just eat that, because then you'll know, and then you can be your own God, and you'll be way better at it than God is, right? And Eve was like, that sounds reasonable, sure. So she eats the fruit, and Adam eats the fruit with her. Like, he also knows the rule. He's standing right there. He didn't stop her, right? So people try and blame it on women, but the dude totally should have been like, hey, don't do that. Anyway, we both messed up. Right, so Satan tricked us. They ate the apples. And then what happened was, this was another really good question. Was it like the fruit was some magical thing, and when they ate it, all this bad stuff happened? No. We believe it's a symbol, right? Kind of like God told them not to do this one thing, and they broke God's rule. So it wasn't necessarily the fruit that was bad as much as it was the fact that the people broke God's commandment, right? Like, they broke the one rule, right? It's kind of like when your mom, like, bakes cookies, right? And she says, these cookies are for a party later and people are coming over, and don't eat any of them. And your dad goes and, like, eats one anyway, right? And your mom's like, "Whoa!" And, like, you know, it's kind of funny, but this is way more serious, right? God said, because you broke that one rule I gave you, and you think that you can be a better God, like, that's sin. And I kicked Satan out of heaven because he sinned. Like, I can't have you in there either, because God wants to be just and fair, right? He's not just like, you guys have teachers maybe who, like, set a due date for something. Like, everyone has to have it in by this date, and then everyone turns it in except for, like, that one kid, right? And then that kid, like, they're like, oh, yeah, it's okay, like, you can turn it in later, right? And you get really mad because that's not fair. They didn't follow through on their word. And God is a fair and just God, so He always follows through on His word. So when He says He hates sin and it can't be around Him, it doesn't matter who has sin, right? If it's Satan, He can't be around him. If it's us, we can't be around him, right? So, because we sinned, it created this giant gap, and we're going to talk about that later. So, but I guess our first question is, if God made us in His image, why aren't we perfect like Him? So God did kind of make us perfect at the beginning, right? Except for He gave us this thing called free will, right? Like, He didn't make us robots and put us here on Earth just to do exactly everything that He said, because that's not fun, right? Like, He would have just built a robot instead of a human being. It said we were made in God's image, right? So being made in God's image, there's something about him that's in us, right? Like, he's obviously creative. He made the entire world. He made duckbill platypuses. Like, he's amazing. Like, he creates stuff, right? And he wanted us to be the same way. We reflect him in some way. We get excited about little things, right? Like, we enjoy the company of others. Like, those are images of, that's part of the image of God in us, right? So he enjoys seeing that, just like we talked about last time, that we enjoy seeing like children be who they are, because it's just amazing to watch like what they think is cool and what they have fun with and what they get joy out of. God felt the same way about us. So no, he didn't make a mistake when he made us. Sin came into the world through one man. And Paul made this awesome statement in a Bible verse. He was writing to people in Rome, and this is in Romans chapter 5, verses 12 through 19. That's in the New Testament. This is a letter that Paul wrote to the Christians there. And this is what he wrote. When Adam sinned, Adam, remember the first guy that God made, right? Sin entered the world. Adam's sin brought death. So death spread to everyone, for everyone sinned. And you're like, hold time out. Like, so what? One guy messed up and like for the rest of ever, humanity's like toast? No, here's the deal. Remember, we talk about sin as a disease, right? It's a disease that is passed down. It doesn't mean that you're a horrible, terrible person, like we all deserve to be imprisoned right now, right? That's not what it's saying. Sin is this disease that kind of eats away at us and kills us from the inside, right? And everyone has it. And think about it. Just even, we talk about little kids as being awesome, but also think about a little kid. Like, think about a toddler, 2-year-old, right? They do not know how to share or be kind to others unless they're taught, right? Like, it's not normally a natural thing. Some do it pretty well, but like, kids don't always make the right choices, right? And in the same way, we don't always make the right choices. The thing that happened when Adam and Eve ate that, they just said that they wanted to make their own choices and they don't want to listen to what God's choices were. And that's what keeps going on down through generations. That's what's passed down, right? Like, we want to be the kings of our own world. We want to make our own choices, right? And that's really what sin is, saying, God, I don't care about what you say. I want to do what I want to do, right? And a whole bunch of things fall under that, and every one of them is sin. So sin spread through everyone because Adam brought that whole idea in, right? Like, we could just still be living, eating fruit off of trees and like not getting sick and dying just like God intended, but instead he thought he was better. So God had to do something because he's just and fair to say, hey, this sin isn't okay. All right. So verse 13 in Romans chapter 5 says, yes, people sinned even before the law was given, but it was not counted against them as sin because there wasn't any law to break. All right, we'll keep moving on from there. So verse 16, it says, and the result of God's gracious gift is very different from the result of that one man's sin. For Adam's sin led to condemnation, all of us being in trouble, right? But God's free gift leads to our being made right with God, even though we are guilty of many sins. For the sin of one man, Adam, caused death to rule over many. But even greater is God's wonderful grace and his gift of righteousness. For all who receive it will live in triumph over sin and death through this one man, Jesus Christ. So God isn't just saying you guys are in trouble because one guy messed up, right? He's saying you guys are counted righteous if you live and identify yourself with Jesus, right? Verse 18, it says, yes, Adam's one sin brings condemnation for everyone, but Christ's one act of righteousness brings a right relationship with God and a new life for everyone, right? Because one person disobeyed God, many became sinners. But because one other person obeyed God, many will be made righteous, right? We all have the choice to make that choice for Jesus. We can be made righteous. We don't have to live in that sin, but God did not make a mistake when he made us. He wanted to give us free will because he loves us and he wanted to see what we would do with it. And even though we mess up, he still made a way for us to be sinless and be in his presence. And that's what happens with Jesus. We're going to talk about that with our next question.